Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sarah Spinks.
Hello and welcome. Today we're discussing something that's incredibly important but rarely discussed in depth, the new Terrorism Protection of Premises Act, or what many people are calling Martyn's Law. This act has just gained, at the time of recording, it's just gained royal assent, forming part of the UK's broader counter-terrorism strategy contest. And it's a direct response to the Manchester Arena inquiry and London Bridge inquests. And it introduces a new legal framework to protect the public in places where people gather, including schools.
And I think I want to start by saying this. It's not about panic or fear. It's about preparedness. Sorry, I got my teeth in there.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
when I was a head teacher, emergency planning was a key part of our safeguarding strategy. But this act takes that expectation and puts it into law. Are we ready to respond if the unthinkable happens?
Yeah, that's really the heart of it. The Act applies to primary and secondary schools, further education and university premises. Basically any setting listed in Schedule 1 of the Act. And it takes a tiered approach based on how many people are expected to be on site at the same time.
So Sam, can you break down the difference between the standard duty and the enhanced duty?
Okay, I'll give it a go. Standard duty applies when 200 or more individuals, that includes staff, are expected to be present, and that covers most schools on a typical day. Enhanced duty kicks in at 800 or more individuals, or even if a venue with standard duty hosts a one-off event that brings in attendance above 800 individuals.
And I think that's really critical for schools, isn't it? Especially during sports days or open evenings or community events. Are leaders thinking beyond the everyday numbers and planning for those high attendance occasions?
Yeah, and actually I was just thinking when you were saying that, Sarah, just thinking now about how schools are linked in groups, like academy chains and things. It really wouldn't be unusual to have events where if you're bringing together schools in a chain like that together, you are going to exceed the 800 very, very, very quickly. But, both duty levels, they require schools to have procedures in place for evacuation, that's safely getting people out, evacuations, that's moving people into safer parts of the buildings, lockdown, that's securing the premises, and communication protocols to quickly alert staff and pupils.
Now, I'd imagine most schools already have something like this in their emergency response strategy. I certainly did. But are those plans regularly reviewed? I think that's important, that regular reviewing of those plans. And do staff actually know them, or are they just sort of sitting in a folder?
Yeah, and those are really great questions. And often it's not until you actually have to do something and, you try and implement it that you realise, well, that didn't quite work properly. We need to make amendments. So I think that's part of the problem as well. You can create a fantastic emergency response strategy, and actually on paper it might not be. It's all the small practical things that might just not make it work quite the way you hoped it would do.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important. The enhanced duty, though, takes it a step further because it includes additional responsibilities for things like monitoring for suspicious behaviour, controlling how people actually move in and out of venues, implementing physical security measures, and securing sensitive information that could be misused in an attack.
And I think that's a big shift for educational settings, isn't it? Schools are used to safeguarding against abuse or accidents, but how prepared are we for deliberate acts of harm? And how do we balance safety, creating that sort of welcoming school environment that we still want?
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the responsible person under this act. That's the individual controlling the premises, for example, a head teacher or principal. They carry the legal responsibility, even if tasks are delegated.
And I know from experience that the weight of that responsibility is real. You might share duties across your team, but at the end of the day, you're the one accountable. And that's why having clear plans, staff training and documented compliance is so important.
Yeah, and speaking of compliance, the Security Industry Authority, the SIA, that's the body overseeing this. It has the right to inspect premises, usually with 72 hours notice, and can issue civil sanctions or fines if the act isn't followed.
Which leads to another question. Are schools maintaining records that demonstrate their emergency planning?
Yeah.
Can they show that staff have been trained? And do they know what to expect if the SIA comes knocking?
Yeah, all good reasons to treat this act seriously, even though it's not yet in force. Settings still have time to prepare, so although it has gained royal assent, it is going to be phased in. So there's time to prepare, and I think that's key. Right now, the national threat level in the UK at this time of recording is substantial, and that is interpreted, it means an attack is likely.
And that uncertainty, I think, is the hardest part. You don't get a warning. So how can schools make sure their readiness isn't just theoretical, but practical? So I think drills, briefings, signage, clear communication, that all really matters.
Absolutely. And for anyone listening who's involved in school leadership, premises management, or safeguarding, now's the time to review your plans. This isn't about ticking boxes. It's about being ready to protect lives.
And I suppose because at the heart of this law, is a young man named Martyn and his mother who didn't want any other family to experience the pain that she did. So Martyn's law they believe will be a legacy, but it's also a call to action.
It absolutely is. And I would just reiterate, I know I've said this is the time to review all the plans, but please do test some of these drills, some of these plans. Look at how effective the communication is. Be prepared to change things around. Also think about, as we know, no one school day is the same. So while something might work perfectly on one day, on another day where children may be located in different areas or outside or off-site, you really do have to really think this through and really see how effective the plans that you have put in place, how truly effective they are. Mm-hmm. So we've included links in the podcast to the contest strategy and the full fact sheets on Martyn's Law and guidance for emergency response planning in school. Obviously, you can, if you haven't organised training, there is emergency response strategy and planning training available on the SSS Learning website. So I think my sort of closing thing would be, remember, preparedness is part of safeguarding. So let's treat it that way.